Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan is one of the worst reviewed films in an already abysmally reviewed series. It is also, to this day, the single worst performing Friday the 13th film of all time, with the box office so low that Paramount sold the character rights after its release. This is, by all accounts, a movie that nobody likes. Not critics, not the fans, not the studio, no one. Except me. I like Jason Takes Manhattan. The last Friday film of the 80s before a 4-year hiatus should have been a winning number on paper. I mean, putting critic reviews to the side for a moment, as the series was never going to truly appeal to that demographic, this should have at least been a money-making machine. The concept alone was extremely marketable. Jason Takes Manhattan. It's brilliant! Take one of the most iconic horror monsters of all time and let him loose in one of the world's most iconic cities. That should sell itself. The trailers were great, the marketing campaign featuring Jason slashing through the famous I Love NY graphic got a bunch of controversy that was essentially a boatload of free advertising, and even if you don't have any of that, the mere image of this towering, hulking monster of a masked man basked in the capitalistic drizzle of 1,000 billboard lights should have been enough to hype anyone who had ever even partly glanced at the franchise for this movie. It certainly had an effect on me. Before ever catching the film, I had seen that shot of Jason in Times Square like a million times, and it always had this sense of awe about it, long before I even knew what movie it was from. It had been featured heavily in horror documentaries, listicles, random dudes' Facebook cover photos, I'm sure. It is one of the most iconic shots of the monster's long career, yet it comes from one of his most reviled movies. So what gives? Well, one of the things definitely fighting against the film was that it's less Jason Takes Manhattan and more Jason takes a boat and maybe at some point very briefly you'll catch a glimpse of New York. You see, Friday the 13th might have had big ambitions, but it still had a small Friday the 13th budget. After Part 7, that film's director John Carl Buechler, as well as its star Lar Park Lincoln, both started work on follow-up screenplays that would see the psychic Tina returning in some fashion. But ultimately, the studio passed on those ideas, possibly due to Seven's disappointing box office, and decided instead to hand the reins for the 8th entry in the series to first-time feature filmmaker Rob Hedden, who had proven himself on the Friday the 13th TV series, which, if I haven't mentioned already, and I've wrote a lot of these now so my brain's a little scrambled and I'm genuinely not sure, was a TV show that besides the name and rights holders has absolutely fuck all to do with the rest of the Friday the 13th franchise. Just thought I'd mention that because if you're anything like me, if that was the first time you heard Friday the 13th TV series, you probably went, wait, what? And while it's got nothing to do with Jason, I've heard that some of it is alright in case you're interested. Anyway, to get back to the movie, the first question Rob asked when coming on for the series was, does the film have to take place at Crystal Lake? And when the studio told him not necessarily, he gave two potential pitches. One was Jason on a boat, which he suggested would be this kind of claustrophobic, stormy sea tale, with Jason hiding in the lower decks and killing off the passengers and crew one by one in a more skulking take on the character than we had been used to. Think Ridley Scott's Alien, only instead of an alien as an antagonist, it's Jason, and instead of a spaceship, it's just a ship. No space necessary. The other pitch was Jason in New York, which he had big ideas for. And honestly, his original vision kind of sounds totally goofy in all the right ways. Just an absolute big dumb dream of a movie. In the documentary Crystal Lake Memories, Rob said everything about New York was going to be completely exploited and milked. There was going to be a tremendous scene on the Brooklyn Bridge, a boxing match in Madison Square Garden. Jason would go through department stores, he'd go through Times Square, he'd go into a Broadway play, he'd even crawl onto the top of the Statue of Liberty and dive off. Brilliant fun stuff, right? But though initially the studio were all for this big adventure, when the numbers came in on how much it would actually cost to bring all this stuff to life, the cold feet started to set in. As Rob puts it, initially individual scene cuts occurred, like, oh, we can't get the Brooklyn Bridge. But then that snowballed and became, oh, actually we can't get New York for the whole film, maybe just half of it. Until eventually it was just settled on, How about we just have New York in the final act and we can trick shot most of it by shooting in Vancouver and pretending it's New York? So what ended up ultimately happening was Rob had to make a film that was kind of a Frankenstein's monster of his two initial pitches. One part Jason on a boat, and another, much smaller part, Jason in New York. Although the film was very heavily marketed and even titled imply it was mainly the latter and not really the former, when actually, the opposite was true. The film begins, rather ironically, with a genuinely excellent mood-setting prologue taking us through Manhattan. It's an almost "here's what you could have won" style opener, as it teases an incredibly cinematic and moody looking high budget movie. As a rocking performance of the power ballad The Darkest Side of Night by Metropolis fills the air, we see a vivid depiction of the seedy underbelly of late 80s New York, first opening on the bright lights of Times Square before cutting to the back alleys and night spots. Rats crawl out of gross oil drums, a man is mugged walking home, tired patrons fill a late night coffee joint, and graffiti and gangs punctuate every other frame. Between the noir-esque narration, the excellent music, and the smoky moody visuals, the filmmakers managed to create a sequence that is so damn good, it honestly has no right being in this movie. And after that brilliant establishing sequence, we rather hilariously then cut to somewhere else entirely, changing scene instead to a setting you'll grow to be very familiar with by the end of the film's runtime. A boat. Though actually not the boat that'll be the setting of the bulk of the movie. Yes, this film that has a problematic amount of boatage tries to vary its settings by trading one boat for another different boat. It's actually kind of funny really. So this first boat is a cozy little number that houses, you'll never guess, a couple of horny teenagers. Never accuse this franchise of not giving people exactly what they expect. Don't bother learning their names though, because they won't be lasting long. After the guy tells some scary Jason stories recapping the legend of the man behind the mask, he drops anchor and just happens to do so right next to where Jason lays. The anchor tears some power cables, which then take a leaf out of part 6's book and electrify Jason back to life, who is a lot slimier this time round. I don't hate this look and vibe for him. I actually think the sound effects on his movements are really effective, but I do think design-wise, it's a step down from what I consider a pretty perfect incarnation in VII. Kane Hodder still absolutely smashes the role though. It's the little things, but the exaggerated rise and fall of his chest when he's breathing, and that kind of tensed up, puffed out stance he takes for the character really add a lot. He also has surprisingly great comic timing. The dude's like legit funny in this one. I don't care what anyone says about how corny the jokey stuff is, it really works for me. So anyway, once resurrected for like the billionth time, Slimy Jason makes quick work of the teens on the boat. And fun note, this scene has some of the worst acting in the series. This woman here is supposedly hiding for her life after watching her boyfriend murdered in front of her and narrowly escaping the killer, who is now skulking around outside, and she looks like she's waiting for her oven pizza to finally be done. This is weak even by the low standards of the franchise. Thankfully, like I said, neither of these guys stick around long, and after they're killed, we quickly cut to our main cast. A graduating group of teens, shocker, that are celebrating finishing their senior year with a big blowout trip, taking the cruise ship the SS Lazarus over to New York City, chaperoned by their kind-hearted English teacher Colleen and their grouchy biology teacher Dr. Charles, who is brilliant by the way, a total highlight of the movie for me, and my favourite non-Jason Friday the 13th villain. Peter Mark Richmond plays such a believable, loathable arsehole of a man, juggling both that kind of stick-up-his-ass condescension you usually associate with authority figures in teen movies, but also not crossing over into self-parody territory, occasionally coming across as though he actually cares about some of the kids on board and wants to protect them, even if his methods of showing this affection is often infuriatingly misguided. He feels shockingly three-dimensional for a Friday the 13th side antagonist. Where VII's villain was completely cowardly and manipulative in every respect, Dr. Charles feels like a real person. Though rare, there's times when he shows concern, compassion, and even bravery, but it never overrides the fact that he is otherwise a detestably awful person, stuck in his own sense of self-righteous old-school mentality. And also, unlike VII's villain, he actually gets to have his grisly end fully realised. He's a brilliant bastard of a man, and is quite possibly the most fully realised character of the entire franchise outside of the 6th film. It's not that he brings to the table any totally groundbreaking stuff exactly, he is just essentially an unpleasant authority figure character you've seen in other teen movies, but still, it's played well here, and of a far higher writing quality than the series is known for. Anyway, to get back to summarising the plot, Colleen brings along our protagonist Rennie, a high-achieving student and Dr. Charles's niece, who isn't very happy to see her on the boat as she has severe aquaphobia. Regardless of her fear though, she wants to be included, and so the SS Lazarus sets sail with her teachers, the crew, and a familiar group of teenage archetypes. The mean one, the mean one's reluctant bestie, the sporty one, the love interest, the nerdy one, the cool one, and a bunch of other extras who seem to disappear and reappear whenever the movie needs them. Naturally, Jason sneaks aboard this ship. How exactly he got here is anyone's guess. Why he came here is also anyone's guess. I assume he just fancied a holiday? Whatever the reason, he immediately makes himself at home and begins to quickly dispense with the crew and teens. Highlights include the cool rock girl getting hit with her awesome guitar, and this quite shockingly good sequence involving Eva, the mean girl's friend, played by Kelly who I'm choosing to single out as someone amongst the teens who I want to name the actress of, because this woman deserves a huge amount of credit for her excellent stunt work in this scene, which she did entirely herself. In the scene, Eva flays Jason after finding her friend's body and finds herself cornered in the ship's onboard disco room. Looking to each exit, Jason seems to be everywhere at once, in a creative choice that doesn't really make any logical sense, but totally just feels like Jason's vibe, if that makes sense. There's a running joke about how in horror movies the killer will often walk everywhere and yet still catch up to running victims. It's a consistent enough trope that other movies even reference it from time to time.
You have no idea how much cardio I have to do. It's ridiculous. There's that whole thing of making it look like you're walking, and everybody else is running the rest, so.
Jason was always picked out as a particularly guilty party of this trope, but up until this movie, I didn't think he really did anything with regards to catching people that couldn't be explained in some way. In this scene though, he just straight up seemingly teleports. But it's cool. It doesn't make much sense exactly, but I vibe with it. It makes him seem scary in a truly otherworldly manner, and it adds a lot of tension to the scene. Plus, it just feels very Jason-esque in spite of its logical inconsistency. It's a silly movie franchise doing a silly thing that feels true to its silly character in a cool and fun way. Eventually, Jason springs on Eva and chokes her out as he holds her up to the ceiling. It looks fantastic, as the ceiling to the room is super low, making horror look absolutely massive. And this is aided by the fact that Kelly is so much shorter than he is. What's really incredible though is the way Kelly sells her death fall. Kane himself, who is literally a stunt person by trade, commends her work here in the Crystal Lake Memories documentary. He points out that she had an extremely difficult task, as when he dropped her, she was supposed to be a dead body and couldn't break her fall, which instinctually must have been an incredibly difficult thing to do. But she drops down from that ceiling like a bag of bricks. It totally sells the whole thing. One of my favourite kill sequences in any Friday movie. And it's a totally bloodless effort. Well fucking done, Kelly. One weird thing that never really makes sense in the movie that happens though is while all this is going on, our protagonist Rennie is for some reason plagued with visions of Jason as a drowning child in his boxer shorts. I can't really explain this. It does technically tie into the ending, so there is an attempt to elaborate on it further, but the ending makes even less sense, so I'm really not sure what is happening here. We do get a flashback scene later revealing that this character was pushed into Crystal Lake by her uncle when she was younger, and maybe hallucinated Jason then, or was actually pulled down by Jason. I don't know. It's all a bit weird and incoherent, and timelines don't really make a lot of sense. I have no idea what any of this is about, to be honest. And let's be real, this is way too much plot to try and put in a movie where the central conceit is, what if Murder Hockey Man was on boat? Other than that though, the film is very much just your bog standard Friday the 13th slasher for this portion of the movie. Just on a boat. There's a small attempt to change up the formula, with the cast becoming aware of Jason's presence and trying to actively hunt him rather than flee, which does give us this amazing line.
What are you taking, Julius? Nothing. But this gun.
Ultimately though, it still all plays out the same, with the cast getting killed off in isolation of one another in a fairly by the numbers manner and with a regular enough frequency until the last few survivors have to evacuate. This includes basically our protagonist and everyone directly related to her story, So her uncle, her teacher, her love interest, her dog, and the one exception to this rule, the sporty kid Julius, who surfaces from the water as they're about to leave, having been thrown into the ocean earlier by Jason. The survivors row off, leaving Jason on the now sinking ship and wander the seas, hoping for the safety of land until eventually, over a whole hour into this film called Jason Takes Manhattan, do they see the Statue of Liberty and dock at the film's titular location. Somehow, Jason has followed them here. Once again, how he achieved this feat is literally anyone's guess, even the filmmakers don't know.
We went through all of these, scenarios of how did he get there, and then we ultimately decided, let's just let the audience wonder and let them try to figure it out. He'd been doing all these other things during the movie that defy any kind of human logic.
Anyway, once we get to Manhattan, the film really starts to get cooking. It's just a shame we have to wait 2/3 of the film to get here. Initially, there's a rocky start with a really gross kidnapping of Rennie by a couple of gang members who drug and attempt to do things to her that if I mention, the YouTube algorithm might demonetize this vid. But I'm sure you can get where I'm going with this. It makes for deeply uncomfortable viewing and feels completely tonally at odds with the fun slasher hijinks and goofy tone the film has been filled with so far, but thankfully it's a very brief sequence and Jason soon surfaces to see these gang members to a sudden and violent end. And from this point until the very ending, the movie is just, at least in my opinion, a groovy good time. We don't see anywhere close to the amount of New York as we should, and of the bits we do see, a lot of it is actually faked and they're just filming in Vancouver and saying it's New York, but my uneducated British eyes that have never seen the Big Apple in all its in-person glory was easily fooled by this trick. And when those money shots of Jason right in the middle of Times Square hit, God damn are they cool! This sequence in particular was a career highlight for Kane Hodder, who described feeling like a rock star for the shoot. It was easily the sequence with the largest amount of the budget spent on it, and being slap bang in the middle of one of the most densely populated cities in the US meant that they drew crowds. Hodder often tells the story of how he played to the crowd for this moment, never once taking the mask off or breaking character between takes, and at one point while standing there menacingly after the cameras had cut, he gave, in full costume, a signature stare towards huge numbers of people watching the film, which apparently caused them to cheer in unison with delight. Now, a criticism often levelled at this big ending segment of the film is that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Jason historically kills almost indiscriminately, until here, because it would be hard to film, he suddenly doesn't, and instead becomes one-track mind focused on taking down only Rennie and her company in particular. We see him pass huge numbers of people without so much as giving them a sideways glance. He reveals his face to a bunch of punks who try to start something with him for a comedic moment. He wanders between subway carriages filled with potential victims and acts completely uninterested in all of them. And while I get this is sort of weird and inconsistent, I personally find it really hard to care, because the whole thing is just big, daft fun. Jason's on the subway, man, that's so dumb and rad. Besides, it's not like these movies have ever been particularly consistent before. I can suspend my disbelief for a bit and assume Jason just had a bit of a change in focus after some people escaped him on the boat and he doesn't want to let them specifically get away. Especially when this new focus leads to my single favourite sequence in any Friday movie ever. The boxing match. I really hope this is the scene the director had in mind when he pitched Jason in Madison Square Garden. Okay, so picture this. Jason chases boxer Julius up to the roof of a building. With nowhere else to run, Julius tries doing something no one has ever done with Jason before. Give him an old traditional fist fight. He delivers a punch, and then another, and another, and another, and another. This one-sided striking goes on and on and on until it gets to a point where it is long overstayed where you thought it would end and becomes genuinely hilarious with how ridiculously played out it is. It just keeps going. Each hit tiring Julius more, each strike causing a minimal response from Jason at best. Like, I know this doesn't sound particularly funny, but I swear down, every second it goes longer than you originally think it should have, it just gets better and better. And then, just when you think the sequence can't make you smile any wider, it caps it all off with a brilliant final closer. A tired and bloody knuckled Julius says, "Take your best shot," to which Jason responds by literally punching the man's head off, which rolls off the roof and into a dumpster. Unfortunately, despite all this joyous nonsense, the film regrettably ends on some not so joyous nonsense. Going from "this is weird and silly" to this is just weird and doesn't make any sense, but not in a remotely fun way. The film's final moment sees our heroes running from Jason in the sewers, where he comes into contact with large amounts of toxic waste, and for some completely inexplicable reason, this turns him back into a child. An absolutely baffling ending, even by the standards of a series that has made quite the habit of not really sticking the landing. This is just bizarre. More than any fake Jason reveal, more than any sudden appearance of alcoholic ghost dad, more than any weird child in practical makeup distractions, it's just total and complete fucking gibberish. And there's only so much you can hand wave away with, it's just a dumb fun movie. For that logic to apply here, you need this ending to at least be fun, but it doesn't leave any lasting impression other than mild confusion. Ending aside though, I honestly don't mind this entry into the franchise. Not great, but certainly not as bad as its reputation would suggest if you ask me. I don't blame anyone going into this one being disappointed though, because the premise it promises could have been so much better than the end result. However, much like I said about Friday Part 7 in my last video, this was a film that was kind of doomed to fail from the start. It might not have had exactly the same things fighting against it, but it was still backed into a corner throughout development. Whether it was the budget preventing it from fully realising its core ideas, or a marketing campaign that promised those same ideas the budget was knocking back were indeed still there, the response was, needless to say, less than stellar. It was always going to be a dud with the critics, almost every film in this franchise always is, but it maybe could have won over a few fans had they not been essentially, well, blatantly lied to about what the film was. But here's the thing about Jason Takes Manhattan. While it absolutely fails to deliver on its titular premise, I honestly don't think this is a bad Friday the 13th at all. Not in the grand scheme of things anyway. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's no masterpiece. Its ending is janky as hell, it's never as fun as 6, it's not as effective a slasher as parts 1 and 2, nor does it have much of a big impact on the legacy for fans of the franchise like 3 did. But on the other hand, it's never quite as self-serious as the lulls of 7, it's got a nice tongue-in-cheek sense of humour, it plays fast and wild with what Jason can actually do in logically silly but visually entertaining ways, it's got a great secondary antagonist in Dr. Charles, and I'd say it's a great deal more enjoyable to watch than Friday 5, and it is an infinitely better movie than what comes next. Speaking of, I suppose that's our next video. So please hit the subscribe to my Only Dans at the red button below to make sure you don't miss it when we take a deep dive into Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday. And believe me, I have a lot to say about that one. Anyway, if you like this video, be sure to let me know with a like, and if you really liked it, then you can become a patron for some fun exclusives, including an active private Discord channel at the link in the description. Also, I'd really like to know what you all think of this one, so please comment with your own thoughts. What do you think? Is Jason Takes Manhattan really the worst the series has to offer? Or are you like me and think it has some real redeemable qualities? As always, I've been Dan Drambles, you're watching Wholesome Halloween 2 Slasher Season, and I will see you tomorrow.